now, your brain is calculating your worth based on what you own, and you have no idea it's happening. If you've ever felt that invisible pressure to upgrade your phone when yours works perfectly fine, or found yourself justifying a purchase by thinking I deserve this, or felt a strange anxiety when someone asks what you do for work, because you're worried they're judging your lifestyle, then you felt the invisible hand of social pressure controlling your spending. In the next 50 minutes, you'll understand exactly how these hidden social forces work. You'll see why your financial decisions often feel like they're not entirely your own. And more importantly, you'll learn how to recognize these patterns so you can finally make choices from a place of genuine intention rather than unconscious social programming. But first, I need to tell you about a moment that happens in every childhood, a moment that shapes how we see money, status, and our place in the world for the rest of our lives. Whether you're fully focused right now, or simply letting this play in the background while you work, rest, or drift to sleep, your subconscious mind is listening. The gentle frequencies woven into this audio are designed to quietly reprogram your relationship with money and social pressure. So there's no need to concentrate. Just relax. Let the words do their work. Your mind will absorb what it needs. Picture a 7-year-old child walking into their friend's house for the first time. The house is bigger than theirs. The toys are newer. The refrigerator is fuller. In that moment, without anyone saying a word, that child learns something profound about the world. There are levels. There are differences. And those differences matter. This is the moment when social comparison begins to shape our relationship with money. Not through direct teaching, but through observation. Through the sudden awareness that what we have reflects who we are in the eyes of others. Dr. Leon Festinger, the social psychologist who first studied this phenomenon, called it social comparison theory. But what he discovered goes far deeper than simple comparisons. He found that humans have an innate drive to evaluate themselves relative to others, and when objective measures aren't available, we use possessions as proxies for worth. Think about your own childhood for a moment. Can you remember the first time you became aware that your family had more or less than someone else's? Maybe it was the brand of your shoes, the size of your house, or whether your family went on vacations. Whatever it was, that moment created a neural pathway that still influences your spending today. Because here's what most people don't realize. Those early observations didn't just teach you about money. They taught you about belonging, about safety, about what it means to be acceptable in the social world. When a child notices that their friend's family drives a newer car, their unconscious mind doesn't just file this away as interesting information. It creates an association. Better things equal better people. And if better things equal better people, then having lesser things must mean something about us too. This is how social pressure begins to control our spending long before we even have money to spend. It starts with the unconscious belief that our possessions communicate our value to the world. But the story gets more complex. Because as we grow up, we don't just internalize these comparisons. We learn to anticipate them. We develop what psychologists call imaginary audience syndrome, where we constantly imagine how others are judging us based on what we have or don't have. Dr. David Elkind, who coined this term, found that this phenomenon doesn't end in adolescence as previously thought. Adults continue to carry an internal audience that evaluates their choices, their possessions, and their lifestyle. This imaginary audience becomes one of the most powerful drivers of our spending behavior. Consider how this plays out in your own life. When you're deciding whether to buy something, how often do you think about what others will think? Not just close friends or family, but colleagues, neighbors, even strangers. We make purchasing decisions not just based on what we want or need, but based on what we imagine others expect from someone in our position. This is the beginning of what I call social spending. Purchases made not for personal satisfaction, but to maintain or improve our perceived social standing. And once this pattern begins, it becomes incredibly difficult to break because it operates largely below the level of conscious awareness. To understand how deep this programming goes, we need to explore what anthropologists call status signaling. Every human society, from the most primitive to the most advanced, has developed ways for individuals to communicate their place in the social hierarchy through objects, behaviors, and displays. In traditional societies, this might have been through elaborate clothing, jewelry, or ceremonial objects. In our modern world, it's through brands, gadgets, homes, cars, and countless other material signals. But the underlying psychological mechanism is exactly the same. We use things to tell the world who we are and where we belong. Dr. Thorstein Veblen, the economist who first studied this phenomenon systematically, called it conspicuous consumption. But what he discovered was that this wasn't just about showing off wealth. It was about survival in the social ecosystem. Think about it this way. In our ancestral environment, being excluded from the group was often a death sentence. Those who could signal their value to the tribe were more likely to be protected, fed, and included in cooperative activities. Those who couldn't were at risk of being cast out. This ancient survival mechanism still operates in our modern brains. When we feel pressure to buy the right clothes for work, or the appropriate gift for a wedding, or the expected car for our neighborhood, we're responding to the same deep-seated fear of social exclusion that kept our ancestors alive. But here's where it gets interesting. Modern research by Dr. Robert Cialdini has shown that we don't just signal to others, we signal to ourselves. Our possessions become part of our identity, and when there's a mismatch between what we have and what we believe someone like us should have, we experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. This internal conflict is incredibly uncomfortable. It's the feeling you get when you're driving your old car through an upscale neighborhood, or when you're wearing a discount store outfit to an expensive restaurant. Your brain is trying to reconcile the mismatch between your self-concept and your external presentation. The easiest way to resolve this dissonance: buy things that align with your desired identity. This is why we often make purchases that feel necessary, even when we know they're not. We're not just buying objects, we're buying psychological comfort. Consider how this plays out in professional settings. Dr. Elizabeth Dunn's research at the University of British Columbia found that people consistently overspend on work-related items, clothes, accessories, technology, because they believe these purchases are investments in their career success. But when she tracked actual career outcomes, she found no correlation between spending on professional image and career advancement. The purchases were serving a psychological function, not a practical one. They were reducing the anxiety of potentially being judged as unprofessional or unsuccessful. This reveals something crucial about social pressure and spending. Much of what we think is rational financial behavior is actually emotional regulation in disguise. We're not buying things because they're useful. We're buying them because they help us manage the stress of living in a socially complex world. The fashion industry understands this better than almost any other sector. They don't sell clothes, they sell social acceptance. They don't market functionality, they market belonging. Every advertisement is essentially saying, "This is what people like you wear. This is how people like you fit in." And because fashion changes constantly, this creates a perpetual cycle of social pressure and spending. Just when you've acquired the right clothes, they become the wrong clothes, and the cycle begins again. But clothing is just the most obvious example. This same dynamic operates across every category of consumer spending. Cars signal economic status and personal values. Homes signal family success and social achievement. Even our choice of grocery stores, restaurants, and entertainment options communicate information about our identity and aspirations. Dr. Russell Belk, who has studied consumer behavior for decades, found that people can accurately predict someone's income, education level, and social class just by looking at their possessions. We've become so sophisticated at reading these signals that we do it unconsciously, constantly evaluating others and being evaluated in return. This creates what economists call a signaling arms race. As everyone tries to signal higher status through their possessions, the baseline for what's considered normal keeps rising. What was once a luxury becomes a necessity. What was once impressive becomes ordinary. This brings us to one of the most insidious aspects of social pressure, the invisible rules that govern our spending. These aren't written down anywhere, but they're more powerful than any law because they operate through shame, guilt, and the fear of social judgment. Every social group, whether it's your family, your workplace, your neighborhood, or your friend circle, has unspoken expectations about how money should be spent. These expectations are rarely discussed openly, but they're communicated through subtle cues, reactions, and social feedback. Dr. Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, called this cultural capital, the knowledge of what's appropriate, valuable, and expected within a particular social context. And one of the most important forms of cultural capital is knowing how to spend money in ways that signal you belong. Think about the last time you went to a restaurant with colleagues. Did you consider what your order might communicate about you? Did you avoid the cheapest item because you worried it might seem stingy? Did you avoid the most expensive because it might seem pretentious? These micro-calculations happen constantly, and they shape our spending in ways we rarely acknowledge. Or consider gift giving. Every culture has elaborate, unwritten rules about appropriate gift amounts for different occasions and relationships. Wedding gifts, birthday presents, holiday exchanges, all governed by invisible guidelines that everyone somehow knows, but no one explicitly teaches. Dr. Joel Waldfogel's research on gift giving found that people consistently spend more on gifts than they would spend on the same items for themselves, not because they're more generous, but because they're managing social expectations. The right amount to spend on a gift isn't determined by your budget or the recipient's needs. It's determined by what others in your social circle would consider appropriate. These invisible rules extend far beyond special occasions. They govern everything from how much we should spend on our children's education to what kind of car is appropriate for our profession to how we should dress for different social situations. And here's the crucial point. These rules aren't universal. They vary dramatically between social groups, geographic regions, and cultural backgrounds. What's considered essential in one context is seen as wasteful in another. What's viewed as responsible spending in one community is perceived as cheap in another. This means that much of what we think of as our personal financial values are actually the internalized expectations of our particular social environment. We're not making independent choices. We're conforming to group norms that we've absorbed so completely we mistake them for our own preferences. Dr. Robert Frank, the economist who studies social influences on economic behavior, found that people's spending patterns change dramatically when they move between social environments. The same person who lived frugally in a working-class neighborhood will increase their spending when they move to an affluent area, not because their income increased, but because the social expectations changed. This reveals something profound about human nature. We're constantly calibrating our behavior to match our social environment. We're social creatures first, individual decision makers second, and this has enormous implications for our financial well-being. Because when we're unconsciously conforming to social expectations, we're not making decisions based on our actual values, needs, or financial capacity. We're making decisions based on what we think others expect from us. And those expectations are often completely disconnected from our personal financial reality. Consider how this plays out in social media. Platforms like Instagram and Facebook have created new forms of social pressure by making everyone's lifestyle visible to everyone else. We see carefully curated highlights from hundreds of acquaintances, creating the illusion that everyone else is living a more affluent, exciting, and successful life than we are. Dr. Tim Kasser's research on materialism and well-being found that people who spend significant time on social media report higher levels of financial dissatisfaction and increased pressure to spend money on experiences and items that will photograph well. This is social comparison on steroids. Instead of comparing ourselves to our immediate neighbors and colleagues, we're now comparing ourselves to everyone we've ever known, plus influencers, celebrities, and complete strangers who happen to show up in our feeds. The result is what psychologists call compare and despair, a constant sense that we're falling short of some invisible standard that keeps rising as more people share more highlights from their lives. But here's what's particularly insidious about social media pressure. It doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like inspiration. We tell ourselves we're just getting ideas or staying connected, but our spending behavior tells a different story. We start buying things not because we want them, but because they'll help us create the kind of content that gets positive social feedback. This creates a feedback loop where our spending is increasingly driven not by our actual needs or desires, but by our need to maintain a certain online image. We're not just keeping up with the Joneses anymore. We're keeping up with everyone we've ever met, plus everyone they've ever met. The most sophisticated form of social pressure around money operates through what I call lifestyle inflation expectations. This is the unspoken assumption that as we age, advance in our careers, or reach certain life milestones, our spending should automatically increase to match our new status. Think about the phrases we use to describe this. Moving up in the world, living like an adult, acting your age, dressing for the job you want. All of these expressions carry the implicit message that maturity and success require increased consumption. Dr. Elizabeth Warren's research on middle-class financial stress found that much of what we consider lifestyle inflation is actually status maintenance spending. Purchases made not to improve our quality of life, but to maintain our perceived position in the social hierarchy as our circumstances change. When someone gets a promotion, they often feel pressure to upgrade their wardrobe, their car, or their living situation. Not because these upgrades improve their actual well-being, but because they believe others expect someone in their new position to have certain things. This expectation is so strong that people often increase their spending immediately after a promotion, before they've even received their first larger paycheck. They're responding to social pressure, not financial reality. The same dynamic operates around life milestones. Getting married, having children, reaching certain ages. All of these transitions come with unspoken expectations about how our spending should change. We feel pressure to have the right wedding, the appropriate baby gear, the suitable family home. But here's what's rarely discussed. These expectations are largely arbitrary. They're cultural constructions that vary dramatically across time and place. What we consider normal spending for a wedding today would have been considered outrageous extravagance just 50 years ago. Dr. Rebecca Mead's research on wedding spending found that the average cost of a wedding has increased by over 400% in inflation-adjusted dollars since 1960. This isn't because weddings have become objectively better or more meaningful. It's because social expectations around wedding spending have escalated. The same pattern appears in spending on children. Dr. Pamela Rutledge's studies show that parents today spend significantly more on their children's clothing, activities, and education than previous generations, not because children's needs have changed, but because parenting expectations have become more demanding and more expensive. This reveals something important about social pressure. It's not static. It escalates over time as each generation tries to signal their success by exceeding the previous generation's standards. What was once considered luxurious becomes the new baseline for adequate. Economists call this the hedonic treadmill, but it's more accurately described as a social treadmill. We're not just chasing personal satisfaction. We're chasing a moving target of social acceptability that keeps getting more expensive. And because this process happens gradually, we rarely notice it. We adapt to each small increase in expectations, normalizing spending levels that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Consider how this plays out in housing. The average size of new homes in America has more than doubled since 1950, even as family sizes have decreased. This isn't because we objectively need more space. It's because our expectations about adequate housing have inflated along with our social aspirations. Dr. Robert Shiller's research on housing markets found that much of what drives housing prices isn't economic fundamentals, but social expectations about what constitutes an appropriate home for different income levels and life stages. People stretch their budgets to buy homes not just for shelter, but to signal their success and provide their children with the right address, the good school district, the safe neighborhood. These decisions are driven more by social positioning than by financial logic. The same pattern appears in car buying. Dr. Brad Edmondson's studies of automotive purchasing found that people consistently buy more car than they need because they're purchasing an identity, not just transportation. A car becomes a mobile billboard for our success, our values, and our aspirations. It communicates information about our income, our environmental consciousness, our family status, and our personal style. And because we know others are reading these signals, we feel pressure to send the right message. This is why car payments have become one of the largest budget categories for most families. We're not just paying for transportation, we're paying for social signaling. And because cars are visible to everyone we encounter, the pressure to signal appropriately is constant. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of lifestyle inflation expectations is how they create a sense of entitlement around spending. We begin to feel that we deserve certain things based on our age, our achievements, or our social position. This feeling of deserving is incredibly powerful because it transforms wants into needs in our psychological experience. We're no longer choosing to buy something, we're simply claiming what's rightfully ours. Dr. Tim Kaiser's research on materialism found that people who feel entitled to certain possessions experience more financial stress and less life satisfaction than those who view their purchases as choices rather than rights. When we feel entitled to a certain lifestyle, we're more likely to use credit, more likely to rationalize overspending, and more likely to experience resentment when we can't afford what we believe we deserve. This entitlement is often reinforced by our social environment. Friends, family, and colleagues may express surprise or concern if we don't upgrade our lifestyle as expected. "You can afford it now," they say. "You've earned it. You deserve nice things." These well-meaning comments create additional pressure to spend, even when our financial situation might not support it. We're not just managing our own expectations, we're managing others' expectations about how we should be living. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of social pressure around money, the anxiety that drives so much of our spending behavior. What I call status anxiety is the constant, low-level worry about whether we're measuring up to social expectations and what others think about our financial choices. Dr. Alain de Botton, who has written extensively about status anxiety, describes it as a worry so pernicious as to be capable of ruining extended stretches of our lives, that we are in danger of failing to conform to the ideals of success laid down by our society. This anxiety manifests in countless ways. It's the stress you feel when your credit card is declined in front of others. It's the embarrassment of not being able to afford the restaurant your friends chose. It's the worry about what your neighbors think of your lawn, your car, or your holiday decorations. But status anxiety goes deeper than these obvious moments. It operates as a background hum in our daily lives, constantly evaluating whether our possessions, our lifestyle, and our choices are adequate compared to those around us. Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research on stress physiology found that social comparison stress, the kind caused by feeling lower in status than others, triggers the same biological responses as physical threats. Our bodies react to social inadequacy as if we were in actual danger. This makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. In our ancestral environment, low social status often meant reduced access to resources, mates, and protection. The anxiety we feel about not measuring up is our ancient brain trying to motivate us to improve our position in the social hierarchy. But in our modern consumer culture, this ancient mechanism has been hijacked. Instead of motivating us to develop useful skills or build meaningful relationships, status anxiety drives us to buy things. We try to purchase our way out of social insecurity. This is why shopping can feel so emotionally satisfying in the moment. When we buy something that improves our image or status, we get a temporary relief from status anxiety. Our brain rewards us with a hit of dopamine for taking action to improve our social position. But this relief is always temporary, because the underlying anxiety isn't really about the specific thing we bought. It's about our general sense of security in the social world. And that security can't be purchased. Dr. Tim Kasser's longitudinal studies found that people who try to manage status anxiety through consumption actually experience higher levels of anxiety over time. The temporary relief from buying something is quickly replaced by new worries about maintaining their improved image or keeping up with the next level of expectations. This creates what psychologists call an approach avoidance conflict. We're simultaneously drawn to spending because it temporarily reduces anxiety, and stressed by spending because it creates financial pressure and often fails to deliver the lasting satisfaction we're seeking. Consider how this plays out around major purchases. When we're considering buying a house, a car, or even expensive clothing, we often experience intense anxiety about making the right choice. But this anxiety isn't really about the practical aspects of the purchase. It's about the social implications. We worry. Will this choice signal the right things about me? Will others approve? Will I fit in or stand out in the way I want to? Will this purchase help me feel more secure in my social position, or will it create new vulnerabilities? These concerns are so powerful that they often override practical considerations like affordability, functionality, or actual need. We make financial decisions based on social fears rather than financial logic. Dr. Dan Ariely's research on decision-making found that when people are experiencing status anxiety, they consistently make less rational financial choices. They focus more on how their decisions will be perceived by others and less on the actual costs and benefits to themselves. This is particularly problematic because status anxiety tends to increase during times of economic uncertainty or personal transition, exactly when we most need to make careful financial decisions. When someone is starting a new job, going through a divorce, or experiencing a change in income, they're already feeling vulnerable about their social position. This vulnerability makes them more susceptible to social pressure and more likely to make purchases aimed at managing their image rather than their actual needs. The credit industry understands this dynamic very well. Many credit card and loan advertisements specifically target people during transitions, offering them the ability to maintain their lifestyle or get back on their feet through borrowing. These advertisements aren't selling money. They're selling relief from status anxiety. They're offering a way to avoid the social discomfort of having to change your spending patterns when your circumstances change. But borrowing to maintain status is one of the most financially destructive patterns people can fall into. It creates a cycle where financial stress increases status anxiety, which drives more spending, which creates more financial stress. Dr. Elizabeth Warren's research on personal bankruptcy found that a significant percentage of people who file for bankruptcy report that they continued spending at unsustainable levels because they were afraid of what others would think if they reduced their lifestyle. They were literally choosing financial ruin over social embarrassment. This might seem irrational, but it makes perfect sense when you understand how deeply our sense of safety and belonging is tied to our ability to maintain social appearances. The tragedy is that the social judgment we're so afraid of is often largely imaginary. Dr. Thomas Gilovich's research on the spotlight effect found that people dramatically overestimate how much attention others pay to their appearance, possessions, and lifestyle choices. We imagine that others are constantly evaluating and judging our financial choices, but most people are too busy worrying about their own status to pay close attention to ours. The audience we're performing for is largely in our own heads. But even knowing this intellectually doesn't make the anxiety go away. Status anxiety operates at a much deeper level than rational thought. It's wired into our social instincts and reinforced by a culture that constantly tells us we are what we own. So how do we break free from these invisible chains of social pressure? How do we learn to make financial decisions based on our own values and needs rather than the imagined expectations of others? The first step is simply awareness. Most people go through their entire lives without ever recognizing how much their spending is driven by social pressure. They mistake social programming for personal preference. They think they're making independent choices when they're actually conforming to group norms. But once you start to see these patterns, you can't unsee them. You begin to notice the subtle ways that social pressure influences your daily financial decisions. You start to recognize the difference between what you actually want and what you think you should want. Dr. Susan David's research on emotional agility suggests starting with what she calls emotional granularity, learning to identify and name the specific emotions driving your behavior. Instead of saying, "I need this," try asking, "What am I really feeling right now?" Are you feeling anxious about fitting in? Worried about being judged? Excited about improving your image? Guilty about having less than others? Ashamed of your current possessions? Each of these emotions suggests a different underlying need, and understanding the emotion can help you find healthier ways to meet that need. For example, if you're feeling anxious about fitting in at work, buying expensive clothes might temporarily reduce that anxiety, but it won't address the underlying insecurity. You might get better results from focusing on developing your skills, building relationships with colleagues, or simply accepting that some level of workplace anxiety is normal and doesn't require a purchasing solution. The second step is developing what psychologists call values clarification. This means getting clear about what actually matters to you, independent of what others expect or what society promotes. Dr. Stephen Hayes, the developer of acceptance and commitment therapy, suggests a simple exercise. Imagine you're at the end of your life, looking back. What do you want to have spent your time, energy, and money on? What would you regret spending too much on? What would you regret not investing in? Most people, when they do this exercise, realize that their deepest values have very little to do with possessions or status. They value relationships, experiences, personal growth, contribution to others, health, and meaning. Very few people on their deathbed wish they had owned more expensive things. But our daily spending often reflects very different priorities. We spend enormous amounts on things that don't align with our deepest values because we're responding to social pressure rather than personal intention. Values clarification helps you create a filter for financial decisions. Before making a purchase, you can ask, does this align with what I actually value, or am I responding to social pressure? The third step is learning to tolerate the discomfort of not conforming to social expectations. This is perhaps the most challenging part, because it goes against our deep social instincts. Dr. Brené Brown's research on shame and vulnerability found that the fear of not belonging is one of our most primal fears. When we choose not to conform to spending expectations, we risk social disapproval, and that risk can feel genuinely threatening. But Brown also found that people who live authentically, who make choices based on their own values rather than others' expectations, experience greater life satisfaction and more genuine connections with others. The key is to start small. Choose one area where you're willing to tolerate some social discomfort in service of your financial well-being. Maybe you decline an expensive group dinner and suggest a less costly alternative. Maybe you drive your paid-off car for another year instead of upgrading. Maybe you buy generic brands instead of name brands. Pay attention to what happens. In most cases, you'll discover that others care far less about your choices than you imagined. And the people who do judge you harshly for making financially responsible decisions probably aren't the people whose opinions should matter most to you anyway. The fourth step is building what I call social courage, the ability to make choices that serve your well-being, even when they don't conform to group expectations. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or deliberately provocative. It means developing the inner strength to prioritize your authentic needs over your image management needs. Dr. Amy Cuddy's research on presence and authenticity found that people who practice aligning their actions with their values, even in small ways, develop greater confidence and resilience over time. Social courage grows through practice. Each time you choose financial authenticity over social conformity, you strengthen your ability to make independent decisions. You prove to yourself that you can survive and even thrive without constantly managing others' opinions of you. The fifth step is finding or creating social environments that support your values rather than undermine them. This might mean spending more time with people who share your financial priorities and less time with those who create pressure to overspend. Dr. Nicholas Christakis' research on social networks found that our financial behaviors are strongly influenced by the people we spend the most time with. If your social circle normalizes overspending, debt, and status competition, it will be much harder to break free from these patterns. This doesn't necessarily mean ending friendships, but it might mean being more intentional about how you socialize. Instead of always meeting friends at expensive restaurants, you might suggest cooking together at home. Instead of shopping as entertainment, you might propose free activities like hiking or visiting museums. You can also seek out communities that explicitly value financial responsibility and authentic living. There are online and offline groups focused on minimalism, financial independence, sustainable living, and other philosophies that prioritize values over possessions. The sixth step is developing what psychologists call intrinsic motivation, the ability to find satisfaction in activities and choices that are inherently meaningful rather than socially rewarded. Dr. Edward Deshie's research on motivation found that people who are primarily driven by intrinsic factors, personal growth, relationships, contribution to others, experience greater well-being than those driven by extrinsic factors like wealth, fame, or social approval. This means learning to find joy and satisfaction in experiences that don't require significant spending. Reading a book from the library instead of buying the latest bestseller. Cooking a meal at home instead of dining out. Taking a walk in nature instead of going to an expensive entertainment venue. These activities might not generate social media content or impress others, but they can provide genuine satisfaction and help you reconnect with what actually brings you joy. The final step is practicing what I call financial mindfulness, bringing conscious awareness to your spending decisions in the moment they're being made. Before making any non-essential purchase, pause and ask yourself, what am I really buying here? Am I buying this thing for its practical value? Or am I buying relief from social anxiety? Am I purchasing something I genuinely want, or something I think I should want? Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn's research on mindfulness found that simply bringing conscious awareness to our automatic behaviors can dramatically change our patterns over time. Most spending decisions happen automatically, driven by habit, emotion, or social pressure. But when you slow down and bring awareness to the process, you create space for choice. You can recognize the social pressure without automatically responding to it. This practice takes time to develop, but it's incredibly powerful. Over time, you'll find that you naturally start making decisions that align more closely with your actual values and less with imagined social expectations. Not mind. As we reach the end of our exploration, it's worth reflecting on what we've discovered together. We've seen how social pressure begins shaping our relationship with money from early childhood, how status signaling and invisible social rules create powerful spending pressures, and how status anxiety drives us to make financial decisions based on fear rather than wisdom. But we've also seen that awareness is the beginning of freedom. Once you understand how these invisible forces operate, you can start to make more conscious choices. You can begin to distinguish between what you actually want and what you think you should want based on social programming. The goal isn't to become completely immune to social influence. That would be neither possible nor desirable. We are social creatures, and caring about how our choices affect others is part of what makes us human. The goal is to become more intentional about which social influences you allow to shape your decisions. To choose consciously which groups' expectations matter to you and which ones don't. To develop the inner strength to prioritize your authentic values over your image management needs. This is not easy work. It requires courage to swim against social currents that are often invisible but always powerful. It requires the willingness to tolerate some discomfort as you learn to make decisions based on your own compass rather than others' expectations. But the rewards are profound. People who break free from social spending pressures report not just better financial outcomes, but greater life satisfaction, more authentic relationships, and a deeper sense of personal integrity. They discovered that the things they thought they needed to buy to be happy, accepted, or successful were largely illusions created by a culture that profits from their insecurity. They learned that true security comes not from having the right possessions, but from knowing who they are and what they value, independent of others' opinions. And perhaps most importantly, they discovered that the acceptance and belonging they were trying to purchase through their spending was available all along through authentic connection with others and with themselves. Remember the 7-year-old child we talked about at the beginning, walking into their friend's house and suddenly becoming aware of differences in possessions? That moment of comparison doesn't have to define a lifetime of financial anxiety and social spending. You can choose, starting today, to write a different story about money, status, and social belonging. A story based on your authentic values rather than imagined expectations. A story where your financial choices serve your well-being rather than your image. The invisible forces that have been controlling your spending are only powerful as long as they remain invisible. Now that you can see them, you have the power to choose differently. Your subconscious mind has been absorbing these insights throughout our time together. Even if you weren't consciously focused on every word, the deeper patterns of understanding have been forming. The gentle frequencies woven into this audio have been quietly reprogramming your relationship with social pressure and spending. In the days and weeks ahead, you may find yourself naturally pausing before purchases, naturally questioning whether your desires are truly your own or responses to social programming. Trust these moments of awareness. They are the beginning of your financial freedom. The path forward is not about perfection, but about practice. Each conscious choice you make strengthens your ability to live authentically. Each time you choose your values over others' expectations, you become more free. And as you become more free, you may discover something beautiful. The people who truly matter in your life care far more about who you are than what you own. The acceptance you were trying to buy was already yours, waiting to be claimed through the simple act of being genuinely yourself. Thank you for taking this journey into the hidden psychology of money and social pressure. May your financial choices from this day forward serve your authentic self rather than your imagined audience.